Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Edward Griffin. I'm a member of the John Birch Society, and it's my pleasure to be able to serve as your host in this introductory presentation. We are well aware that many Americans have strange and sometimes exaggerated ideas of what our society is and what we as members do. And so the purpose of this presentation is simply to set the record straight and clear up as much of the confusion as possible. To do this, we'll not waste valuable time trying to answer all of the many charges and accusations. Instead, we'll be more positive in the telling of our story. Rather than refuting what is untrue about the John Birch Society, we'll attempt to show what is true. We'll explain what the society is, why it was founded, what it does, and how it functions. And if we succeed in answering these questions, then you'll be able to see and judge for yourself what the society is not. A good place to begin our story is with this book, The Life of John Birch. Written by Robert Welch in 1954, over 4 years before the founding of the John Birch Society, this volume reveals the inspiring true story of one of the finest young men this country has ever produced. It's also a fascinating story, not only of the tragic era in which he lived, but of the ideals for which he was willing to die. In those two elements, the life and death of John Birch, one can find the key to an understanding of the society which now bears his name. And so, to help create that understanding, let's take a closer look at this young man and at the events which eventually led to his name being known to almost every literate person on the face of the earth.
This is that vast region of China that lies between two great rivers, the Yangtze and Wangho. It was here on the Lunghai Railway that the final scenes of a most extraordinary story were enacted. The citizens of Suzhou memorialized the event by creating a park on a hill overlooking the town. Here, beneath a marker bearing the inscription, "He died for righteousness," lie the remains of the first American casualty of World War III, Captain John Morrison Birch. Yes, this is China, north of the Yangtze, south of the Wangho. This is also Asia, west of the Yellow Sea, east of Tibet, and halfway around the world from America. American though he was, John Birch's life ended where it began. For as Asia was the place of his death, so also was Asia the place of his birth. At the foot of the Himalayas, at the headwaters of the Ganges, in Landauer, India, John Birch was born to missionary parents on May 28, 1918. Displaying at an early age the alertness of mind and zest for living, for which he would be remembered in later years, John was receptive to the serene spirit of his Islamic nurse and the stoic influence of the Indian people. A full share of love and happy family life gave him a personal security and inner strength that was to sustain him through many hard hours in years to come. Back in the United States, John Birch and his brothers and sister, direct descendants of John Alden, are as American as Calvin Coolidge and Buffalo Bill Cody, to both of whom they are directly related. As a Boy Scout, John learns outdoor skills and develops a self-reliance that will later help him endure the hard life of a coolie in far-off China. Studious and quick to learn, independent and resourceful, he graduates from high school at the head of his class. Mercer University in Macon, Georgia, is where John decides to be a missionary to China. He graduates from Mercer in 1939 with his Bachelor of Arts degree, magna cum laude. Enrolling in the Bible Baptist Seminary in Fort Worth, Texas, John completes 2 years' work in 1 year and still graduates at the head of his class. He leaves for China almost immediately. When John arrives in Shanghai during the summer of 1940, China has been at war with Japan for 2.5 years. He stays in Shanghai for the first 6 months. Attending a language school, he picks up the local dialect in record time. In fact, by early 1941, he masters the difficult native language well enough to be sent to Hangzhou, where he teaches at a Chinese school for boys, conducts religious services, and works with Chinese ministers in many small churches throughout a wide area. His routine missionary trips back and forth through enemy lines are not viewed kindly by the Japanese. On the very first day of war with the United States, December 7, 1941, the Japanese forces in China send soldiers to arrest one John Birch, American missionary. Alerted to the danger, John narrowly escapes and flees to Jiangxi province, where he continues to expand his missionary work. On April 18, 1942, launched from the deck of an aircraft carrier, Colonel James Doolittle leads his famous raid on Tokyo. The pilots know they can never land their bombers on the carrier, so they simply head toward free China as far as their fuel can carry them. They bail out over enemy territory. Meanwhile, John's missionary activity has brought him once again deep into the Japanese-held sector, and the next night finds him inconspicuously seated at a small cafe in Zhejiang province. A stranger approaches and whispers, "If you are an American, please follow me." Outside, John is led to a boat that contains none other than Colonel Doolittle himself and his flight crew. They tell John that they're desperately in need of a translator and help in getting through Japanese lines. And so, with no thought of personal danger, John leads the group out of enemy territory. On the way to Langchi, he tells Colonel Doolittle of his desire now to join the American forces in China, preferably as a chaplain, but in whatever capacity he can be most useful. Sometime later, while in Guilin, and quite by coincidence, John meets General Claire Chennault of the famous Flying Tigers. The general gives him a ride to Chongqing in an army transport plane. This is the beginning of a friendship that deepens through the trials of war. General Chennault later revealed that he came to regard John Birch almost as his own son. On the 4th of July, 1942, John is commissioned as second lieutenant in the United States Army Air Force. But because General Chennault already has a chaplain, and because he desperately needs old China hands who speak the language, are aware of the intricate social customs, and who can live on the meager Chinese diet, John accepts the dangerous assignment of gathering information behind enemy lines. In March of 1943, he is sent to Changsha as liaison and intelligence officer with the Chinese Army in that area. Here he trains over 100 vitally needed Chinese radio operators. Using cloth panels on the ground to pinpoint enemy targets, and personally directing the bombing runs by radio, John quickly becomes almost a legendary figure known to all as the Eyes of the 14th Air Force. From sites overlooking the Yangtze River, John and his crew are able to maintain such a surveillance that the Japanese are unable to move a single ship on the river without the Air Force knowing it. On one occasion, when Air Force pilots have repeated difficulty in finding a particular munition dump, John filters back through enemy lines to a friendly airfield, and then, riding in the nose of the lead bomber, he personally pinpoints the target for the bombardier. The dump is completely destroyed. Once again far behind enemy lines, and entirely on his own initiative, John undertakes the seemingly impossible task of building 2 emergency airfields. He is able to secure almost incredible cooperation from both Chinese soldiers and civilians, not only because of his ability to deal with them diplomatically, but also because of their profound personal respect for this missionary soldier. His sincere friendship for the Chinese and devotion to their cause is so unmistakable that literally thousands of coolies labor by the most primitive methods to build his airstrips. These valuable fields deep in enemy territory do not cost the U.S. Air Force one single penny. After 3 long years of war, young John Birch is now a man. In a moment of meditation, he writes to his parents, "I am growing in the ability to handle men in the achievement of difficult tasks. So these years of violence are not entirely wasted." Yes, the young soldier is looking toward the future, and he has amazing foresight. He writes home, "I believe that this war and the ensuing federations will set the world stage as never before for the rise of the Antichrist." In September of 1944, for exceptionally meritorious conduct in performance of outstanding service, General Claire Chennault proudly pins the Legion of Merit on Captain John Birch. The end of war did not by any means clear up the problems in China. 3 million Japanese were now virtually stranded in that vast land they had entered 8 years earlier as conquerors. The resulting chaos demanded that many difficult missions be undertaken to unscramble the confusion. Assigned to one such mission are Captain Grimes, Lieutenant Ogle, and Sergeant Myers of the United States Army, 2 Korean and 5 Chinese enlisted men, Lieutenant Tung of the Chinese Army, and Captain John Birch in command. Shortly after departure, their train is stopped by a break in the tracks of the Lunghai Railroad about 50 miles west of Suzhou. They transfer their gear to a small handcar and then press on to the east toward their destination of Tsingtao. Despite the warning that there are marauding bands of communist guerrillas ahead, the men feel that as Americans and as allies in the war against Japan, there should be nothing to fear from the communists. And besides, the war is over. Has been for 10 days. Finally, they meet up with a force of communist guerrillas several hundred strong, deliberately adding to the existing chaos by tearing down telephone wires. After negotiating with the communist guerrillas for about 20 minutes, Captain Birch finally is able to make arrangements to proceed. With great relief, the group moves on. But unknown to them, a message has been sent ahead, and the worst is yet to come. An hour later, the party meets a second communist group, apparently headquarters for the guerrilla band. Once again, they are ordered to halt. Captain Birch and Lieutenant Tung ask to speak with the man in charge. After a brief conversation, they are led into the village and then left surrounded by soldiers while the communists pretend to be trying to find their leader. Captain Grimes and the rest of the party stay behind. Lieutenant Tung overhears several of the communist soldiers and warns Captain Birch that his life may be in danger if they stay. John replies, "It doesn't make much difference what happens to me, but it is of utmost importance that my country learn now whether these people are friend or foe." Friend or foe? The answer is quick in coming. Disarm that man. Captain Birch demands to know by what authority an American officer is being disarmed. Wait, if he is to be disarmed, let me do it. No, shoot him first. Lieutenant Tung has been shot in the leg and then bayoneted. The last thing he remembers is an order for Captain Birch to move out. But John, also hit in the leg, replies, "I cannot walk." friend or foe. As the body of John Birch lies lifeless in a ditch, the question is answered. World War III has begun. This is China, north of the Yangtze and south of the Wangho, August 29, 1945. While Americans on the other side of the world are still rejoicing over the end of World War II, the first American casualty of World War III is carried to his grave. John Birch commanded no armies, headed no government, converted no nation to his creed. But with his death, and in his death, the battle lines were drawn in a struggle from which either humane civilization or godless communism must emerge, with one completely triumphant and the other completely destroyed.
The year 1945 found Americans in no mood to worry about such trifles as communism. With rationing gradually being lifted, long-awaited consumer goods began returning to the stores, and the country plunged headlong into one gigantic spending spree. Yes, with so much prosperity and leisure time, how could there possibly be any cause for worry? While we played happily at our little games, the communists were taking the world. We had fought one of the bloodiest and costliest wars of history to put a stop to the expanding tyranny of the Axis powers. But in less than 10 short years of so-called peace, communism had already conquered far more land and people than Hitler at the very zenith of his success. The marching of soldiers and the rattling of missiles frightened the free world with the specter of Soviet military might. But since 1945, not a single Russian regiment had ever been used to capture any of the nations fallen to the Red Empire. The communist technique of conquering a country from the inside had forced upon us a new kind of war. A war not of machines and soldiers, but of words and ideas. The strategic targets were no longer cities and factories, but the minds and loyalties of men. The pattern was well established. First, trained agitators who conceal their communist loyalties. Then massive demonstrations, leading eventually to violence. From violence to the pretense of civil war. With the collapse of established government, revolutionary leaders rip off their masks and openly seize control. Thus, communism liberates one more piece of the world. The brutal rule of a communist slave empire has been imposed on the average upon 7,000 human beings every hour of every day of every year since 1945. Yes, the technique of conquest from within has worked well. Back in the United States, life went on as usual. We convinced ourselves it could never happen here. Or could it? The first uneasy signs had already appeared. The testimony of former communists Elizabeth Bentley and Whittaker Chambers had led to the shocking exposure of such highly placed agents as Alger Hiss. Congressional investigating committees had compiled overwhelming evidence of communist infiltration into all phases of our national life. The Reds had moved into education, labor unions, news communications, and even government itself.
The Communist Party of the United States is a fifth column if there ever was one. It is far better organized than were the Nazis in occupied countries prior to their capitulation. They are seeking to weaken America, just as they did in their era of obstruction when they were aligned with the Nazis. Their goal is the overthrow of our government. There is no doubt as to where a real communist loyalty rests. Their allegiance is to Russia, not the United States. The communists have been, still are, and always will be a menace to freedom, to democratic ideals, to the worship of God, and to America's way of life. I feel that once public opinion is thoroughly aroused, as it is today, the fight against communism is well on its way. Victory will be assured once communists are identified and exposed, because the public will take the first steps of quarantining them so they can do no harm. Communism in reality is not a political party. It is a way of life, an evil and malignant way of life. It reveals a condition akin to disease that spreads like an epidemic. And like an epidemic, a quarantine is necessary to keep it from infecting this nation.
The warnings went unheeded, and the Reds went deeper into the woodwork. Then came Korea, and the Cold War became a ridiculous phrase. While communists were murdering Americans somewhere in the world almost every day, officials in Washington spoke in soft terms of accommodation and compromise to promote peace. A strange kind of peace with an enemy dedicated to our destruction and killing our own people. While the United States staggered in confusion and defeat in a world war it stubbornly refused to recognize, those who tried to lead a counteroffensive were isolated one by one. Men like Congressman Dyes were labeled controversial. Men like Senator Taft were ignored, and men like Senator McCarthy were destroyed. Of course, there were many others who recognized the growing internal menace of communism, but not being in public office and without a voice in our communications media, they did what they could as individual citizens. They also joined together into small groups to make their individual efforts more effective. But almost without exception, these loosely knit organizations became bogged down with indecision, committee action, and leadership struggles. Soon they broke up into still smaller splinter groups and then withered on the vine. Some were even infiltrated by communist agents posing as patriots, who then took over these groups and used them for their own purposes. But fortunately, ladies and gentlemen, fortunately for ourselves and for history, there was one man who would not accept the established pattern of defeat. After years of study and observation, Robert Welch conceived a unique formula for victory. He analyzed not only the vulnerable points of communism, but the weaknesses and mistakes of previous anti-communist efforts as well. He knew that one man could never stand alone against the cunning teamwork of an organized conspiracy. But he also knew that an organization set up along typical parliamentary lines was doomed to failure, as the record clearly had proven. So he drafted a plan for a new kind of organization, a plan which, if only put into operation quickly enough, by enough people, and with sufficient dedication, could yet turn the tide. And so, in December of 1958, the John Birch Society was born.
In the beginning, the society was just an idea in the mind of one man. But soon this man attracted to him some of the most prominent leaders in the American conservative movement. Today, these men comprise the council or the governing body of the John Birch Society. From all walks of life and from all over the United States, the council members are prominent in their respective business and professional fields. Naturally, they are keenly aware of the treacherous and deceptive tactics of communism. But they also understand the political and economic concepts upon which our American system has been built. These are men of unswerving principles. They cannot be compromised by opposition, corrupted by pragmatism, frightened by controversy, or swayed by the chanting of public opinion. Serving without compensation, and often at great cost to themselves, these men truly are a credit not only to the John Birch Society, but to their country as well.
Good evening, Marion.
Hello, Art. Good to see you.
Hi,
John.
Nice to have you. Don't forget to fill out the chart.
Okay.
Hi there, Chuck. Great to see you.
At the membership level of the John Birch Society, the working units are called chapters. Once each month, a chapter meeting is held in the home of one of the members. The relatively small size of these units enables them to avoid most of the time-consuming requirements of larger groups.
Helen, I'd like a book on the Panama Canal.
Oh, here, Hans, this is...
Oh, yes,
Great.
the untold story of Panama, yes. May I check that out, please?
Surely.
Each chapter maintains a lending library of basic books which are constantly in circulation. These libraries are provided by the Society at no charge to the members as a means of encouraging them to read at least one book every month.
Here's Charlie's MM. And there's my MM.
Thanks. Excuse me, Marion. I don't think I have your MM.
Oh, yes, here it is.
There we go. Thanks.
Each member turns in a small sealed envelope containing his personal monthly message. They're gathered together and then forwarded to the home office where each one is read carefully and acknowledged. In this way, any comments, suggestions, or contributions, if any, are always confidential.
I'll only need about a minute at the end of the meeting to announce these tickets, Dora.
Fine, Bill.
Excuse me, Bill. Dora, here's the chart. It's 7:30.
Oh, we better get going. It's time to start the meeting, everyone. Please take your seats.
Go, Art.
The chapter leader is responsible for starting the meetings on time. These are all busy people, and they have not come for a social hour.
A well-run chapter meeting reflects the serious nature of the Society's objectives.
Please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance and remain standing for the invocation.
Merely being patriotic or anti-communist is not sufficient qualification for membership. The John Birch Society seeks only those of goodwill, humane conscience, and religious ideals who can set a personal example which others may follow without hesitation.
Dear Heavenly Father, once again we ask your blessing and your guidance for our efforts in the common cause which brings us together. We thank thee for the gift of freedom in this great republic, and we pray for the strength, the wisdom, and the courage in our efforts to preserve for ourselves and our children the blessings which we have inherited. Amen.
I want to congratulate the members on their excellent record of participation in the Society's programs last month.
A high degree of participation is expected from each member. As Robert Welch phrased it, we need pullers at the oars and not passengers in the boat.
It's the dedicated few, you know, who are going to win this battle for us. So I hope that next month our record of activity will be just as good as it was this month. I know you've all read the bulletin, so I won't go into it in detail, but there are one or two things that I want to emphasize. The theme of the bulletin this month is that we must stay on the offensive because it isn't possible to win a purely defensive battle. The program to impeach Earl Warren is a good example of an aggressive program which is already gaining a great deal of momentum. It's far more effective in educating people about the activities of the Supreme Court than it would be to protest the individual court decisions. Hans has been preparing a talk.
One of the cardinal principles of the John Birch Society is that victory requires taking the initiative. But to put international communism on the defensive requires the combined and organized efforts of many people all working together.
And for visual aids, I had these layout charts made. And next week, I'll have slides made from these. And if you'll contact me after the meeting, I will have them made available to you.
Now let's hear Brian's report on the impeach Earl Warren billboard.
I'm happy to make the report that the impeach Earl Warren billboard that our chapter has donated, along with 5 others, is in the process of being put up. It's on top of a building on a main street, one that will be seen by a great amount of traffic.
Thanks, Brian. That billboard will be a big help.
Concerted action, one of the reasons the communists fear the John Birch Society. It's the first time anywhere in the world that they have met truly solid, organized opposition.
Our Support Your Local Police bumper stickers have arrived for those of you who have requested them. We're happy to say these bumper stickers have been seen on automobiles in every state of the Union, and the response has just been wonderful.
Thank you, Helen. Oh, I almost forgot about Charlie. He'd never forgive me if I didn't give him a chance to tell you about the interesting FBI report he has, which ties in with our Support Your Local Police campaign. Would you give it to us now, Charlie?
In the January issue of the FBI Law Enforcement Bulletin, this article by J. Edgar Hoover, revealing the dangers of politically inspired police review boards, had such general interest that I had 1,000 copies run off for use of the members for distribution in whatever way they see fit.
Individual responsibility has become a byword among members, and they practice what they preach. And so it goes, night after night, in every community across the nation. The meetings progress right on schedule.
We're happy to have Bill Rawson, our section leader, visit us tonight, and he would like to make an announcement. Bill?
I want to remind all of
A volunteer section leader is responsible for several chapters within the same community. He attends meetings to offer suggestions and to keep the separate groups informed of area-wide projects.
And then on the 27th of this month, the Society is sponsoring Tom Anderson. He'll be speaking at the Civic Auditorium. I want to be sure that you're there. I have some tickets here tonight. You can get them at the end of the meeting. They're going pretty fast.
Thanks, Bill. Our chapter has already made a commitment with Bill for 75 tickets to this important meeting, and I hope you will all get some and be sure to attend. Before we close, let me remind you that our next educational meeting is on the 20th, and it covers the material in the United Nations packet. This meeting is designed for those members who are interested in this subject, need a refresher course on it, and also for their guests. Now, for those who would like to stay a while, we're going to serve refreshments as usual, and for the rest who must go home early, the formal part of this meeting is adjourned.
While the chapter meetings begin and end punctually for those with busy schedules, most of the members look forward to the stimulating discussions that follow. The business meeting has been serious, but now there is plenty of time to relax. One of the most remarkable features of the John Birch Society is that its members often build new and lasting friendships as a result of being together and working together with others who share the same ideals and dreams for the future. It's outside the chapter meeting that the plans and the programs of the John Birch Society are transformed into action. Some projects require the coordinated efforts and pooled financial resources of many people. Others can be carried out by just one person who is willing to make the effort and spend the time. Members engage in many activities, but perhaps the most important of all is the task of becoming self-informed. Knowledge is an indispensable prerequisite to intelligent action. The next step is to help inform others. There are many ways of accomplishing this, but one of the best is the most obvious: the direct approach, person to person. Members of the John Birch Society are encouraged to conduct study groups. These usually meet informally several times a month and cover such topics as the history of Soviet global conquest, an analysis of communist strategy, and a review of our American system of freedom and prosperity. Knowledge by itself is useless unless it leads to constructive action. Members know that their carefully written letters to public officials and community leaders often profoundly affect both local and national affairs. A paid advertisement like this one, sponsored by the Los Angeles chapters, is another example of how members translate knowledge into community action. American opinion libraries, owned and operated by members of the John Birch Society, are graphic examples of what can be accomplished when a few dedicated people agree to work together in a common cause. The purpose of these member-operated libraries is to make available in each community a wide selection of reliable anti-communist and conservative literature. Merchandise is for sale here, but these libraries, as the name would suggest, are also reading rooms where anyone can browse or do research with no obligation to buy. American opinion libraries usually become the meeting place and the focal point for most of the community-wide conservative activities. Mobility sometimes has its advantages too. As the old saying goes, if Muhammad will not come to the mountain, then take the mountain to Muhammad. These member-operated libraries have sprung up rapidly from one end of the country to the other. In less than 3 years, their number has grown from 1 to well over 300, and new ones were being established almost every day. Activities like these, carried out on a national level, don't just happen. Leadership is the secret of success. First, there is the chapter leader, usually a business or professional man who accepts the extra responsibility of keeping his chapter functioning at top efficiency. A chapter activity report is sent to the Home Office each month as a record of performance. His duties require frequent contact with each of his chapter members and with his section leader as well. A volunteer section leader overlooks the activities of 6 to 8 chapters. Much of his spare time is spent making personal contacts with chapter leaders and prospective members. Experience has shown that a close-knit organization cannot be run through the mail. At the next leadership level, there are full-time men called coordinators. They work from their own homes or from branch offices like this one in San Marino, California. These men are responsible for the selection and training of section leaders. Thus, the solid organizational structure of the John Birch Society is built step by step from the bottom up. And finally, coordinators routinely conduct the Society's introductory presentations as an important means of stimulating membership growth, the lifeblood of the entire movement. The home office of the John Birch Society is located in Belmont, Massachusetts. This is the nerve center of the entire operation. Here and in regional or branch offices across the country, there are literally hundreds of full-time staff employees. Their function is to provide the many services that are necessary to make a large and dynamic organization truly functional. The members have come to rely heavily on this reserve of organizational support to back them up in their many endeavors. The day's work begins in the executive offices with the arrival of the morning mail. In an endless stream, the letters pour in. Applications for membership, chapter reports, orders for books, requests for information. Each is directed to the proper department. In the accounting department, the mail is further divided by regions and then carefully processed. Membership dues, payments for books and supplies, donations. Every cent must be accounted for, receipted, and then posted. The Society's books are maintained by a professional staff which keeps financial records beyond the minimum requirements of federal law. In addition, the books are yearly audited by one of the largest public accounting firms in Boston. A major part of the mail each day contains applications for membership. A home office coordinator gives his personal attention to each one. The continued growth of the Society has been so phenomenal that it is now necessary to have 5 of these coordinators, each with their own staff, merely to handle the applications and to set up new chapters. It's not unusual to process over 1,000 new members in just 1 week. Setting up and maintaining adequate records for such a rapidly growing organization requires infinite attention to detail. First, a letter of acknowledgement and welcome. Then, a membership card is prepared. After setting up the master file card, the new member is sent a current action bulletin and everything else he needs to roll up his sleeves and get to work. Overseeing this entire operation is the Director of Field Activities. For him, the task of just keeping track of the location of each new chapter can be quite a job. One pin, one chapter. And in the cities, some pins represent as many as 10 chapters each. In addition to processing applications for membership, the Home Office coordinators perform a host of other services for the chapter leaders, section leaders, and staff coordinators in the field. By analyzing the reports from chapters in his area, he is able to alert the field staff to potential trouble spots before they actually develop. Through this kind of teamwork and organizational support, the John Birch Society is something entirely new in the fight against communism. Another example of the way in which the Society has avoided the pitfalls of previous organizations is the MMM form, or the Members' Monthly Message. Collected in sealed envelopes at chapter meetings and then forwarded to this department in the Home Office. These forms not only provide a convenient means of making confidential donations, but of purchasing books and supplies as well. Far more important than the financial transactions, the MMM form encourages members to send in suggestions, to ask questions, and even to offer criticism if they wish. In this way, members can communicate directly with the Home Office without going through the rigid organizational structure so necessary for other aspects of the Society's operation. This is vitally important in that the communication lines between leadership and membership levels are open in both directions. Of course, this policy sometimes brings in rather interesting suggestions. Better send this one to research. If a silly question can be asked, it always finds its way to the director of research. And yet, except for a few chuckles to break up the day's routine, the task of providing answers to these questions is no laughing matter. It's plain hard work. Since the John Birch Society is an army fighting with facts, it needs a lot of ammunition, and here is where the supply is kept. Newspapers, magazines, communist publications, foreign periodicals, the Daily Congressional Record are all read carefully, cross-indexed, and filed for future reference. Government documents are kept here, one of the most complete collections in existence. The research department is of particular value to authors and lecturers who frequently travel great distances merely to gain access to the wealth of material now contained in the Home Office. This is another graphic example of the extensive organizational staff support that is always in reserve to back up the membership at large. The American Opinion Speakers Bureau is an adjunct of the John Birch Society. With regional managers located in key areas, the Bureau fills hundreds of speaking engagements every month. The ability to provide a consistent source of qualified speakers on all aspects of anti-communism and free enterprise has proven to be extremely valuable for the conservative grassroots movement. The Public Relations Department has a particularly difficult assignment. In spite of generally hostile mass communications media, significant strides have been made in presenting to the public a straightforward and unslanted representation of where the John Birch Society stands on important issues of the day. With offices in New York, Washington, D.C., Chicago, and Los Angeles, this staff regularly provides professional news releases, magazine articles, television and radio appearances. The audiovisual department is the most recent addition to the Society's battery of staff services. It is now working at full capacity to produce additional educational tools for reaching still larger segments of the American public. The publishing of books, periodicals, and pamphlets is one of the most important services provided by the John Birch Society. Most of the newly written books are brought out under the imprint of Western Islands. Since many of the best older books have gone out of print, the Society has been bringing them back to life in the form of inexpensive reprints. In almost every case, the reprint editions have reached far more readers than did the original editions of the same books. Another branch of the Society's editorial staff is responsible for the publication of American Opinion magazine, which has become the fastest growing and most widely quoted conservative periodical in America. Membership-operated libraries are a major outlet for the Society's publications, but the shipping department supplies hundreds of other retail stores and also routinely processes thousands of orders from individuals each month. Naturally, there is a great demand for those items printed by the Society itself. But most orders include requests for books from other publishers as well. The rapid growth of the John Birch Society and its steady impact upon public opinion is clearly indicated here in the shipping room, where one can actually see and count the orders come in and the books go out by the thousands. An operation of this magnitude requires the very latest in automatic equipment. This machine inserts as many as 6 separate pieces of literature into an envelope, seals it, and then stamps it with the proper postage. It handles over 6,000 envelopes per hour. Yes, the John Birch Society has come a long way. It is no longer merely a proposal or a dream. It is now a reality which is the largest organized force against communism in the entire world.
At this point in our presentation, ladies and gentlemen, it's easy to see that there are many facets to the John Birch Society. And yet, because of the limitation of time, this is still only an introduction. We have really just scratched the surface. For a thorough understanding of the Society and of the moral and philosophical base upon which it rests, one must be willing to inquire further, to read, to attend meetings, and especially to become familiar with the contents of this, the Blue Book of the John Birch Society. Of course, no presentation would be complete without at least some insight into the personal motives that have led so many dedicated Americans into our ranks. It's so much easier not to become involved, and it's very tempting to rationalize that we can become more effective by avoiding controversy. So the question arises, why have they joined? Well, there are many ways to answer that. But the best of all is simply to let the members speak for themselves.
You know, a few months ago, if anyone had even suggested that I join the John Birch Society, I'm afraid I'd have laughed at them. Well, I didn't believe those silly rumors being circulated. I knew even then that the group had become a whipping boy. No, I didn't feel like I had the time. I felt, if I take care of my family and my home and the politicians take care of the government, everything will work out fine. That's such a comforting thought, it's a shame it's not realistic.
A woman doesn't have to be a genius to see that the safety of her home and her family can't be separated from the safety of the country. If she's honest with herself, she has to face the fact that unless the present trend away from public morality and law and order is reversed, the women of this country will wake up some night to find that their little protected world of lace, luncheons, and frying pans has suddenly collapsed into a nightmare of raw violence and brutality.
Well, a person can pretend that these things don't exist only so long. I guess it was my mother hen instinct that finally came out. I couldn't stand on the sidelines any longer just watching this growing menace to my children and my home and my country without doing something to fight back. I just don't see how any mother could do less.
Our fight against the communists is like a football game, except the stakes are higher. If you put 10 average players on one side of the field and on the other side 100 of the best players you can find, at first you think the 10 wouldn't stand a chance. But if the 100 failed to cooperate, if they each tried to play the game alone, then the 10, working as a tightly knit team, could easily cut through the opposition, just like a knife goes through butter. The communists have been taking over this planet not because there's so many of them, but because they work as a team. They've had an easy time of it because their future victims have never really cooperated in their own self-defense. Of course, now that the John Birch Society has come along, all that has changed. For the first time in history, they're now facing a form of opposition which is based on the same principles of teamwork and cooperation and concerted effort.
Divide and conquer. That's how the communists have been able to take over country after country, with no more than 1 or 2% of the population. By careful and long-range planning, the communists have been able to keep these people from joining together and working together. As I see it, the defeat of the communist conspiracy is actually quite simple. That doesn't mean it's easy, but it is simple. And organization is the key.
At first, the problem seemed so immense and overwhelming. When I tried to do something concrete, I felt completely outnumbered. Just one lone individual fighting a losing battle. Then, through the John Birch Society, I discovered that I wasn't really alone at all. In fact, I found that there were literally tens of thousands of people who were just as concerned as I was, and eagerly engaged in a concerted action program. I'm convinced now that if just 1/10 of all those who are struggling alone would voluntarily join together and combine their individual efforts, the communists wouldn't be able to last 6 months.
Almost everyone is against communism, but just being against something isn't going to defeat it. Everyone was against polio, too, but that didn't stop the virus from striking. By taking specific medical treatment, polio can now be prevented. And communism can be prevented the same way, not just by a mental resolve, but by taking specific and positive action. The only question is, will enough Americans take this action in time? Right now, for instance, many of my colleagues in the medical profession are greatly disturbed by socialized medicine. But where were their objections a few years ago when the utility companies were trying to resist the government takeover of the electrical power industry? And next year, or the year after, when the hand from Washington reaches out for control of the legal profession, my lawyer friends undoubtedly will be up in arms. But where are they today in this fight against socialized medicine? I suppose it's a trait of human nature for people to look the other way till they themselves become involved. But whether we know it or not, whether we like it or not, we're all involved right now.
For 35 years, I've been aware of the steady advance of communism right here in America. I've read books, attended lectures, participated in study groups, everything possible to keep myself informed. But, you know, it's pointless just sitting around in study groups, wringing your hands over how bad things are. The communists couldn't care less about how much we know of their conspiracy if we don't do anything with the knowledge. Thank God, at long last, we now have an organization that not only recognizes the need for study, but which also offers a definite program of positive action.
I suppose that I'm just one of those people that have to learn things the hard way. Because of my activity as a precinct worker, I stayed clear of the John Birch Society because I honestly thought it might hurt my effectiveness. As far as I was concerned, political action was the only way we were going to change our present disastrous foreign and domestic policies. So I wore my lapel button and I handed out bumper stickers and flyers and I made lots of noise at the rallies. I pushed doorbells and even got out the vote and did poll watching. It was then that I learned firsthand what the Society had been saying all along. Old-fashioned political activity, as important as it is, does not create an informed electorate.
As a former member of the Congress of the United States, I can attest from personal experience that successful political activity is best produced by groups outside the political parties. Stop and consider how vacillating a political party can be and must be as it attempts to sway with the winds of public opinion or as it shudders under the pressure of internal power politics. It's then obvious that a group with a firm and uncompromising principles and leadership becomes almost a necessity as a stabilizing force. Walter Reuther's Cope is a perfect example of one such group, which has been selecting and electing candidates for years. The John Birch Society is also such a force, and unlike a political party, instead of collapsing after each election into a snarling heap of disorganization, the Society just keeps right on with its grassroots educational efforts 365 days a year, including non-election years. And it's only this unceasing educational effort to back up the old-style political effort that creates an informed electorate. As I see it, such an informed electorate is the only chance we have for saving our great country.
I've been a minister now for about 18 years. And although I'd been alarmed at the drift away from fundamental church doctrine, it wasn't until I had read the John Birch Society material that I saw the parallel between the spiritual, liberal takeover of the church and the liberal political takeover of our country. Yet because of my own fundamentalist background, I hesitated to become a part of the John Birch Society because I didn't want to mix religion and politics. But the more I meditated, the more clear it became that the Society's fight against communism was far more than just politics. Suddenly I realized that if we don't stop the advance of communism, none of us will be free to preach the gospel. Neither I nor any of my fundamentalist brethren hesitated during World War II to volunteer for the armed services. So why should we hesitate now? Today our country is under a much more serious and dangerous attack by its enemies than ever before. And just as I couldn't live with myself during World War II until I had volunteered to do my part, for the same reason, I couldn't live with myself today unless I had joined the only non-religious organization that has any chance of turning back the greatest enemy our country has ever faced.
One of the strongest and clearest indictments of atheistic communism was once made by a pope of my church, Pope Pius XI, in 1937. In an encyclical letter for the entire world, The Pope said, communism is intrinsically wrong, and no one who would preserve Christian civilization may collaborate with it in any undertaking whatsoever. The John Birch Society endorses that indictment wholeheartedly and completely. As a matter of conscience, as an American citizen, as a member of the clergy, I pray and hope that every American citizen interested in defending our republic against the forces of atheistic communism will become a member of the John Birch Society.
My advice to my fellow Americans is that one should concern themselves very seriously with the fight of communism, against communism in the United States at this time, and they should also concern themselves about the maintaining of this republic. And I think that the best way to do it is to become a member of the John Birch Society.
We're grateful to Mr. Welch for his selecting our son John as a symbol for the John Birch Society. We feel that he has conferred upon him a great honor. And I want to tell you that we're just so glad to be honorary life members of this wonderful patriotic organization. And we know that much as it was a matter of terrible grief to us when we got the word of John's death, when he was so young, yet in this John Birch Society, what John lived and died for is now being carried on through the John Birch Society.
After listening to these moving statements, there is very little that I personally could add. These men and women, not professional actors, but speaking strictly from the heart, have given us the reasons and motivations that have led them to accept willingly the serious responsibilities of membership in the John Birch Society. They also have provided us with the example of personal responsibility and courage, which we hope you will find contagious. And now, my duties as host in this presentation are completed. Obviously, the man best qualified to conclude our story is the one who really began it. It's a great privilege and a personal pleasure to present at this time the founder of the John Birch Society, Mr. Robert Welch.
Ladies and gentlemen, in the closing minutes of this presentation, and mostly by borrowing a few paragraphs here and there from various publications of the Society, let me summarize for you as well as I can the essential elements in its beliefs, principles, methods, and purposes. 1, our goal is less government, more responsibility, and a better world. 2, these aims bring us directly into conflict with the communists on 2 levels. For even on the theoretical plane, the communists fight always and everywhere for more government, less individual responsibility, and a social organization without any dependence on morality. While on the practical plane, they seek to impose this system on others by deception, force, and terror. Obviously, until the communists have been turned back, there will be no chance for us to move forward in our constructive long-range purposes. 3, so the John Birch Society has undertaken to play a leading role in stopping and routing the international communist conspiracy. We are a long way from winning that battle, but both the progress we have made and our potential for the future can be judged by the frantic efforts of the comsimps to damage and destroy us. For it would be easy to show that the incredibly vicious, extensive, and unceasing attacks on the Society have followed directions from Moscow, and that these smears have not been due to our mistakes, but to our successes. 4, the communists do not fear arms or armies,
they control too many of the men who would have to give the orders to march. They do not fear the bombs and missiles of push-button warfare. In most cases, they now own the men who would have to push the buttons. They do not fear guerrilla resistance, the false leadership which they can plant over most guerrilla groups, the betrayals of underground armies which they can contrive, and the horror and confusion they can create when men fight each other without identifying uniforms have been proved in a score of cases from Poland to South Vietnam. Nor do the communists fear purely political action. In every country, they have demonstrated their ability under all circumstances to control and stultify such political action and to mold it to their purposes. In fact, the communists themselves steadily promote all of these concepts of resistance in order to divert the American mind from the internal subversion, which is their unvarying strategy for taking over any country. 5. In this war with the communists, therefore, our own strategy is education, and our only weapon is the truth. For our enemy is a conspiracy, and must cloak its operations with deception and secrecy. The one thing no conspiracy can withstand is the light of day on its methods and activities. The communists have no fear that this light will be let in by newspapers, radio, and television. Their gradual infiltration into these media has been too patient and too heavy. The smooth certainty with which communist influences now bring the leading periodicals, for instance, to follow every step in the communist line is readily indicated by one experience involving ourselves. The New York Times, Life, Look, Time, and every major publication which gave fulsome support to Castro, even after the proof that he was a communist had become unmistakable, has also played a leading role in condemning the John Birch Society, since it became clear that the society was a threat to the communists. And in general, the same thing is equally true of radio and television, so that our own responsibility for focusing light on darkness becomes both more staggering and more vital. For, let me repeat and emphasize, the one great danger which the communists face and fear is simply exposure. If enough of the American people could be brought to understand the methods and the menace of communism, the whole conspiracy would start crumbling within 3 months' time. It is the concentrated and tireless effort of our members to create that understanding. 6. For these reasons and in this manner, we constitute a form of opposition to the communists which they have never faced before. Nowhere else has there been any sizable body of good citizens tightly organized and unwaveringly dedicated simply to bringing out the truth about the conspiracy. And that truth, when fully understood, is devastating. For communism, far from being a movement of the downtrodden masses against their exploiting bosses, is exactly the reverse. It is the long, patient drive of a self-perpetuating clique of power-seeking criminals, usually out of the very highest social, economic, educational, and political circles, using ruthlessly organized cunning and cruelty to impose their rigid tyranny on the total population of the earth. And the condition of the masses always becomes worse than before in any country they have taken over, from Russia itself to North Vietnam and Cuba. And communism, far from being the wave of the future, is completely contrary to man's whole aspiration and history. Communism has developed into simply a huge dirty boil on the body of mankind. Like any such boil, it is very painful. It is seeping poison throughout the whole system. It is dangerous, and it badly needs to be lanced and drained. It is clearly the duty of the John Birch Society, and it may be our destiny, to be one of the doctors to do that lancing and to help to restore the whole body to health and cleanliness again. 7, but our strength and effectiveness are greatly increased by our being far more than merely an anti-communist group. For communism, while more successful than most of its prototypes, is just a contemporary manifestation of those evil forces which, in one civilization after another, have recurrently used collectivism and amorality as the tools of tyranny. Good men and women of religious ideals and humane consciences, of all races and colors and creeds, who are welded together to work now and in the years, decades, and even centuries to come for the beliefs and purposes that we hold in common. If and after the now frightening communist conspiracy has been shattered, we shall be hard at work persuading our fellow citizens to start pulling out of the whole present morass of collectivism with its poisonous miasma of immorality, and then to climb to higher levels of freedom than man has ever achieved before. Our members will be striving to restore the faith-inspired morality, the spiritual sense of values, and the ennobling aspirations on which our Western civilization has been built. Now and always, the positive promise of what we hope to build must supply greater motivation than the negative fear of what we must destroy. 8, the John Birch Society is monolithic in structure. Otherwise, the communists would get inside at all levels and insidiously bog us down in unending dissension and disputes. And so, in frenzied frustration, the communists build up their most vicious smears over our lack of democratic processes. Each new member soon realizes, however, that this organizational form is one of the greatest sources of our strength, and that none of the fears of the tyrannical oppression of individuals which prevail under an autocratic government have any validity in the case of a completely voluntary association from which any member can resign at any time. Naturally, we expect and respect differences of opinion. We need and welcome advice, and we get it by the ton. We strive to use the normal measure of diplomacy, always called for in dealing with human beings. We have no oaths nor secret commitments in the John Birch Society, nor any power to get support for any program except by persuasion. It is a cardinal principle of the Society that foul means are never justified by even the best of ends. And we repeatedly emphasize in our bulletins that no member should ever carry out any of our requests or do anything for the Society that is contrary to his own judgment or conscience. Under all of these circumstances, it is logical to assume that a well-intentioned individual who continuously finds himself in disagreement will simply resign. But once in 1,000 instances, the organization an attempt to form a splinter group or to create raging disputes and confusion. In that case, and without questioning his motives, we simply drop him from membership and give him his money back. For no collection of debating societies is ever going to stop the communist conspiracy from taking us over, and we have no intention of adding another frustrated group to the assortment. We mean business every step of the way. Finally, and without numbers, let me add 2 or 3 miscellaneous paragraphs. We have today an educational army with a paid professional field staff which has grown in just 6 years to a strength and effectiveness far greater than that of any other anti-communist group. Nor do we need to change a line in our program, but simply to keep on going until we can fill the role of David against the communist Goliath. But we are in a race against time, and you might ask yourself this question: If the John Birch Society does not supply the rallying point and the leadership for stopping the communists, just who is there to do so? This is why we need your help, and we need it now. As to the man who thinks that he can avoid death or slavery at communist hands simply by not opposing them, he has not done his homework very well with regard to the communist methods of establishing and consolidating their rule in one country after another. Among the enemies that they ruthlessly liquidate, regardless of what these enemies may ever have done or not have done in the struggle against communism, are landlords, people who own any worthwhile property of any kind, salesmen, for no man with a constructive sales mentality can possibly be made to fit into a communist economic system, and all others who will not replace, even in their own secret minds, loyalty to God and country and family with loyalty to the communist state. The only way to escape being a victim of communist terror is to join us and defeat them, or to join them and become an active party to the enforcement of their terror. And to people who can consider the second possibility, we have nothing to say anyway and are making no appeal. On the other hand, on joining the John Birch Society, you will be amazed perhaps, but you will certainly be thrilled and encouraged to find that there is so much honor and loyalty and dedication to noble purposes still extant among so many people. Rapidly learning how proud our members are of the society and of each other, you will soon come to share that pride. You will find yourself working with other courageous realists and with increasing determination and confidence to ward off the now imminent threat to your own life and freedom. And you will feel a tremendous satisfaction in doing your part to save for our children and their children the glorious country and humane civilization which we ourselves inherited. We know where we are going. Our direction does not change with each new meeting of our council, nor with each new breeze of political expediency, nor under pressures from the enemy, nor the appeals of opportunism. And we sound no uncertain trumpet. The John Birch Society is no place for weaklings or cowards, and there is no comfort in our ranks for the parlor patriot or the sunshine soldier. It is our intention to become the finest body of men and women in the world and the greatest voluntary team that was ever put together. Let me repeat and emphasize, education is our total strategy and truth is our only weapon. But the inner resolution with which our members wield that weapon in concert can move ideological as well as physical mountains. If you have what it takes in character, in courage, and in ideals, come join us in our proud companionship and in our epic undertaking.